my
It's being recorded.
just quick background, how I got into my knowledge of climate change. I was a EPA research scientist, and how I got into that was I was studying geodetic science during my undergrad and my graduate school years, and I got to learn how to use tools to do monitoring of different landscapes, oceans, sea levels, and actually I got to study sea level change using different measurements, and that's my first encounter. Back then we called it global warming or sea level rise. And from there on, I learned to use different satellite images and to interpret what we see in the polar regions, the melting of the ice sheets and the rate and that sort of things. And then I went into EPA to learn about how to use satellite to look at invasive species, vegetation, and eventually I got to work with the tribal members, learn to work with them on what's important to them, the natural resources that they rely on, the cultural practices that they want to keep going, and also how they have to deal with a lot of the changes, including climate changes, social justice, and a lot of all that stuff. So how the research can help them to keep practicing the cultural, what's important for them culturally and also economically. There's a lot of natural resources that they rely on that's going to help their tribe rise. And so I was with EPA for about 14 years, 15 years, and actually I spent good half of that amount of time working with tribal members and not so much to provide my knowledge, but also learning from them, their traditional ecological knowledge, their indigenous knowledge, the things that they used to do that they've been doing for thousands of years. That's how it always worked. And so we need to listen to what the knowledge was and how did they keep that going, and not show up this thing. Here we have the Western science, and here's how it's gonna work. And I know a lot of times that we use quantitative data for the science backup the backup the science methodology, but also I learned to use qualitative data. You know, not everything can be measured with quantitative method. And so qualitative is also important. So that's my quick background on how I got into working with climate change and also working with minority communities. So I'll go ahead and start my talk. So I titled it Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resilience. And so what we really want to look at, what we really want to do at this point is sustainability. How can we keep our lifestyle going in spite of all these changes that we have encountered? How can we practice what we have always done and also have our children and our future generations to be able to do the same? And resilience is basically when we encounter any weather events, climate events, how do we bounce back from that so that we're not having to, not dealing with, having to deal with the damages and rebuilding through, so that we can keep thriving. And I think that's what's important, is how can we keep thriving, and how can we use the resources that we have and the knowledge that we have so that we can continue to practice what's important to us and what's important to our community. I'm just going to very quickly give a few examples of some of the work that I've done dealing with climate change, and these have been published work, so they're clear. We're not sharing any information that I haven't got permission. So these are okay. So the first one is floating vegetation island, and it's using traditional ecological knowledge to develop this island, because we see at this lake that this tribe that I work with, they see, because of the warm temperature, there's a lot of harmful algal bloom. And I think one of the most important things that we deal with is fresh water, clean water, and I think that's important in any community. Even we may think of, well, we could just get water from source, or government probably have ways to provide clean water, but they have to find fresh water and clean water somewhere and clean that as well. So some communities really rely on the local water source for their agriculture, and also their economic wellness. Some of them run fisheries, some of them provide fishing for visitors. And so this is one of the projects that we came up with, that the vegetation cleans up the water pretty well. And what if we build these islands and just set them up in the lake? Let's see what that does. And so that's the project that we worked on. And what we noticed is not only that there is a difference in water quality from before and after building these islands, but also we find that native plants started growing in these islands, and which were some of the plants that always work locally. And because of various reasons, it could be because of agriculture, it could be for some reason invasive species that started growing and start taking out native plants, that a lot of the functions of the lake or of the landscape lost its function of keeping the landscape functioning, so that it provides for the local people. So this is just one of the projects that I worked on with these are the Colorado River Indian tribes. They're along the California and the Arizona border on Colorado River. Next project that I worked on with First Nation members in Canada. It's called Lake Simcoe. It's just outside of Toronto, and they have an island. It's called Georgina Island, and they use that island for a lot of natural resources, and also that's what generates their revenue to keep the truck going. And there's a lot of vacation homes on the island that they rely on a lot on the summer business, so that people can go to the island and enjoy it. And the problem they've been dealing with is warmer weathers does not allow the lake to freeze for the period of time that they used to. They have to rely a lot on the boats that they use to go between Toronto and the island. And it used to be that in the winter that they would just give these boats a break, maintain them and not use them, and then they use these I don't know what you call those, I forgot what they're called, but they run on ice. You can so back and forth on ice, and there's a huge fan of that. That's kind of just I forgot what those are called. Yeah. So
like those things they use in Florida.
okay. Yeah. So now they can't really use those in the winter. They have to rely on the boats again, and then the boats never have time to be maintained and they break down. And so that's one of the problems that they were dealing with. And also, there were some vegetation changes on the island, and also have to do with the stream flow. My background in cellular imagery, I was able to use images from probably 1980s and just kind of look at the changes every year of the different vegetations and the different the man-made structures, and also what other activities that there might be going on. And I found that a certain year that the silver maples kind of just took over. And apparently, I think the silver maples actually take up a lot of underground water, underground water. So that kind of disrupt the creek of its natural flowing pattern. And so I kind of pointed this out to them, like, so what happened this year between this certain year? What happened? It seems like there's a lot of silver maples, and I think that kind of identified the problem. And also they had we're doing some mining as well, but might be a combination of things that kind of made them realize that, okay, so we've got to figure out what are things that we should address at this point, so that we could bring the natural water flow back, and also just what we can do to deal with this climate change. And not so much about fixing the roads or the vehicles, but the natural landscape due to climate change. And so here are the three things that we kind of addressed: is the species at risk, mapping where they are, ash tree monitoring and management, and it's kind of like forestry and natural resource, and invasive species, and shoreline and wetlands restoration and rehabilitation. So that kind of, once that's going, then you bring the water back, and there's a lot of good things that happen when you bring the wetlands back. Kind of help you clean your natural system. And the last one is a small community called Almingo in Mexico. I was very fortunate to be able to go out there to work on this project. This area is in the Gulf of Mexico region, and it's protected by mangroves. And mangroves are great for controlling floods, but then they're also a really great fuel resource. And this is a very remote area. They still rely on basically using wood to keep their the water that they need to use and cook and all those sorts of things. And also the other thing that they grow out there is sugar cane. And because they rely on the mangrove so much, their daily lives, and also for their flood protection, I think there was a lot of just cutting down the mangroves that kind of started a flood problem, and that needed to be addressed. And while we're there, we see a lot of ways that they try to deal with the flood. And from, so basically, what we can see here is, the agriculture, the grazing of the cattle. And when we graze, near the riparian area, basically the area immediately next to water, it becomes not as stable as it would be with the plants that kind of hold the soil in place. And so the riparian widening, so basically it's gonna, the area where the water is gonna expand, and you're not going to, you're gonna have the new stream pattern that you have to deal with. And so, we actually had we work with the community and have looked at, how to adjust some of these things and how to, and kind of point out, the mangroves and the importance. And I think there is a restoration, project that they already, it was already in place to bring back the mangroves, and we it was kind of confirming, that we realized it's, you know, we identified the same problems. So I think what these projects all have in common is this diagram here. It's like a loop. You kind of give a common purpose. What you want to identify what the problem is. So basically awareness, and then understand what it is, and accept that okay, this is something that we have to work with, and come up with that agreement among the community members, and to decide what kind of action we want to take. And once we start that, and we want to monitor how we're doing with these actions. Are we making progress, or is there something that's doesn't look right, or it worked for a while and something else comes up, and then we adapt to what we see, how we address the problem, so that we can kind of just nothing is going to be just fixed permanently, especially with the climate change and everything else. So it's kind of, it's a work in progress that we always doing this loop, so that we address the problem with the community members, and also take actions and see how it turns out. And monitoring is very important. You could do a long-term monitoring, you could do short-term monitoring, but
do you find that when you're looking at this loop, it actually shifts into a spiral? Because when you come around to awareness again, you've got a new set of conditions, right?
It could be, yeah.
And so you start the whole process over again?
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, because, especially we're dealing with change. We're dealing with change, so we gotta change our parameters of what we're doing. We might need to change a few things around to adapt to the current situation. And once it's working, and we just make sure that we monitor how we're doing, and we see how it's turning out. And then this also gives you a chance to be ahead. If you notice something is not working all of a sudden, but everything else is the same and everything else is working, then maybe the conditions has changed. So we need to think, that gives us the chance ahead, to think ahead of what might we be dealing with, still, or what should we do if this scenario happens based on what we see. So I think this is very applicable, not only to the work that I did, but also the work that we could do in a suburban or urban community addressing climate change. I wanted to find a good slide to finish this short talk, but I couldn't find it. But I always remember that in the Bible that God put us in charge of the stewardship of our world, that we need to take care of it, and also, so it's not that here you do whatever you want. No, we've been we've been commissioned to take care of our environment, and that's the stewardship that was that's what we need to keep in mind. And also, the troublemakers, I think they're saying that they plan for the next 7 generations. That's a really good saying. And also, I remember someone said, we're not taking care of our world to pass it down to our children, but rather we're borrowing this place from our children, but we need to return it to them in a good condition. And hopefully it's in a better condition than when we first started. So that's all I have today. Thank you very much.
Kind of like the Abrahamic covenant is to our children's children's children.
Right.
So the idea is that what we're doing is supposed to be for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Julie's going to take us into some other exciting things. Oh, did we not?
It says on screen sharing. I don't know why.
I'm supposed to.
I'm going to stop your screen sharing real quick.
While you're doing that, John, how big a geographical area can you apply that process?
Based on your resource, it could be a very big area. It could be just community based.
Put a number on it. You're talking about 100 square miles, 1 square mile? What?
But yeah, 100 is, yeah, we could do 100. A lot of that is also came from range management, with people that raise cattle, that they rely on in on their farm.
Thank you. Some of the things that John talked about are actually using the principles of climate justice, and I don't cover that in my talk today, but things like working with the marginalized communities to make decisions and use indigenous people's wisdom. So I thought that was covered. I'm just going to go real briefly, like about 10 minutes, on some of the concepts of climate justice, some examples, and some definitions that might help us understand. So just starting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, acts of climate change will not be born equally or fairly between rich and poor, women and men, and older and younger generations. Climate change is happening now and to all of us, and it's always the case, the poor and the vulnerable are the first to suffer and the worst hit. Climate justice is a term, and more than that, it's also a movement, and it acknowledges that climate change can have different social, economic, public health, and other adverse impacts on already marginalized communities. And those communities include low-income communities, people of color, indigenous people, people with disabilities, older or very young people, and women. All these communities are more susceptible to risk imposed by climate impacts. And the history of climate justice, it has its roots in the civil rights movement. One of the first environmental justice protests was it started in 1978 and it went to 1982. It was in Warren County, North Carolina. It was a landfill protest over North Carolina's intent to build a landfill for 70,000 tons of PCP waste soil. So there were marches. They would lie down in the streets in front of the dump trucks. This went on for 4 years. Unfortunately, they were not successful. The landfill was ultimately built. One of the leaders of that, one of the civil rights leaders, Benjamin Chavez, he was the first one that coined the term environmental racism. And since that time, the climate justice movement has recognized that there are more forms of climate injustice, and these are some of them. Racial and social injustice, gender injustice, economic injustice, intergenerational injustice, and injustice to nature. We're going to talk about most of these just briefly, but one that I don't have a slide on is gender injustice. But if we think about how women are impacted by some of these climate changes, women make up more than half of the poorest, the lower income people. It's that's 70% are women. So that's one of the ways that it impacts. If it's impacting poorer communities, then it's also impacting more women. Women are the ones that typically bring water, have to bring water from wells in more remote areas, and they suffer the hardships of that, and also some instances where there's risk to their safety, risk in sexual assault, just women getting water from, they might have to walk much further to get water. This chart shows the emissions of carbon dioxide from 1750 to 2021 in the countries that are responsible. And that, I'll just let you look at that for a minute, because it's kind of sobering.
We're winning, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take a look, and where do you see Pakistan on that chart? No. I don't know, I might make it so that you guys can't see that on there.
Did you press play?
Oh, okay, thank you. There, is that better?
Well, yeah.
Except that we have,
There we go.
okay. Pakistan is not on there. That's a trick question. And the reason it's not on there because it's responsible for less than 1%. And I think we can all remember what happened last summer, last year with the monsoons. They were heavily impacted, and they were not the cause of the greenhouse gases that caused the heavier monsoons, the higher moisture, and the precipitation. And so there were 1,739 people died, and 20.6 million required humanitarian assistance. So the people on that, or the countries on that chart that showed how their emissions were high, what responsibility do we have to these other countries that are feeling the impacts at a much greater level than the industrialized northern nations? And how are we making reparation for that, or helping them mitigate these impacts? That's part of what climate justice is looking at. And by 2040, almost 1 in 4 children will live in areas of extremely high water instability, high water stress. Yeah, I have your little pictures over there. And there's around 450 million people that live in areas of extreme water vulnerability. So this shows a number of different kinds of climate injustice, including how children are more vulnerable, the elderly are more vulnerable. I think that this is an intergenerational, and this typically happens in poorer neighborhoods and in countries that also didn't contribute as much to the causes. Again, who's bearing the responsibility? This chart is 1990 to 2015, and it shows that the wealthiest 5% of the global population were responsible for 36% of the global emissions during that time. Well, and when you add in the next 5 or 10%, so then it's almost 50% of the growth. So this shows in, the United States, the 10 counties most vulnerable to, disasters that are caused by climate, extreme weather and climate impacts, climate change impacts. And in those counties in the United States, the average population, 81% of those people are people of color. So that's a sign of, an example of, racial injustice, climate injustice.
Six of them are in Texas.
Yeah, there's one in Imperial County, California.
Salton Sea issue.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
These areas in Texas, where are they? Are they geographically close to each other? Like, are they?
I would assume that they're in southern Texas, but I don't know that. Does anybody know Texas? There is a map that can show which counties all across the United States and I could say that.
Texas, that's a low level. I mean, it's not high level sea level. Sea level,
Right.
So some of the other examples of racial climate injustice is the lead in Flint, Michigan water, the toxic petrochemical plants in Louisiana, Cancer Alley, the raw sewage backing up into homes in Centerville, Illinois, and the oil and gas projects that overburden some U.S. tribal reservations. In the U.S., approximately 68% of Black people live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. And Black people are 75% more likely than others to live near hazardous waste facilities.
Could you go back and repeat the percent here?
The last.
Coal power.
Oh, the coal one?
Yeah.
68% of Black people live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant.
I was reading recently about workplaces that are mostly confined to people of color, people who are on the lower end of the economic scale. And one of the examples that they brought up was the oil industry's very conscious decision to place petrochemical refinement plants in areas where they would not raise protests, and to put them into vulnerable areas where they would be popular for employment, but at the same time devastating for the local ecology.
Right.
And so she said it was a she said economic decision on the part of large corporations to get that advantage and to not have litigation all the time out there with large protests.
Yes, it wasn't random. Didn't random. This is an example of intergenerational climate. In this case, there was some justice.
Yeah.
This summer, there was a win for some young Montana environmental activists who they had this lawsuit for years, but it was that state agencies were violating their constitutional right to clean and healthy environment by permitting fossil fuel development without considering its effect on the climate, and they won. The judge said the connection was clear, and it's in appeal. So it's also there. Unfortunately, there were some other suits ongoing that are still, they haven't been settled. So this is happening all over the world where young people are suing, and the fact that there was win here is encouraging. Oh, one other thing I want to say about intergenerational is that one of the things that's going to affect young people is, according to the World Bank, by the time Greta Thunberg and her generation are in their late 20s, climate change could force an additional 100 million people into extreme poverty. And some of the impacts that young people will face with this increase in temperature that will have effects on our environment, ranging from species extinction, forced migration, loss of natural resources, and changes in sea levels, some of them. And this forced migration, we can see this in just this short period of time, September 2020 to February 21. 10.3 million people were displaced from extreme weather. That's 4 times more than by conflict.
It's sort of the ultimate conflict.
Wow.
And this is the injustice against nature. And we see that in so many ways around us. It's just to show that we now risk losing up to 50% of land-based species in this century. And 1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened with extinction. This is more than any time in I think it was over the last 10 million years.
Supposed to be right.
Tree inequality. Tree inequality is ubiquitous. In 92% of US cities, low-income neighborhoods have less tree cover than high-income neighborhoods. The rich have on average about 15% more tree cover and live in neighborhoods that are around 1.5 degrees centigrade, cooler than the poor neighborhoods. The trend extends to race as well. In 67% of US communities, people of color neighborhoods have less tree cover than white neighborhoods, even after accounting for trends in income. Okay, so that's just some general information about climate justice, but what we wanted to have some time to talk about here is why are we talking about this in adult ed at a church? You know, what is it important about faith communities? And I shared the last time I was here that one of the things that really kind of pushed me into climate work was seeing Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore here that was offered by the congregation. I think it was a once a month documentary that was shown, and I went to that and it really impacted me. This also, I think, was something I was alarmed with. People with high levels of religious commitment are the least likely to say global climate change is extremely or very serious, and the most likely to say it is not a serious problem.
Can I jump in? You have to read that and you have to say, well, what's the final religious commitment? I mean, there are some crazy, way out there, people who claim God, but who God is running as fast as he can or she. So this is a statement that it's based more on politics, I think.
Well, there's definitely politics in religion in this divide that we're in our country now. There are a lot of people in certain religions that identify politically in more conservative or more extreme view. This is a quote from Reverend Leah Shade. I gotta read it from there because it's covering half of it. I've always felt that the faith community is sort of the sleeping giant when it comes to climate and environmental issues. She's the author of the 2019 book, Preaching in the Purple Zone, Ministry in the Red Blue Divide, which explores how clergy can use the Bible and careful dialogue to address controversial social issues, including climate change, in the same way that the civil rights movement in America was powered by churches and synagogues. The same thing needs to happen, and it's starting to happen with the climate movement. And I think that's kind of an encouraging point, or it's maybe a nudge that what we could be doing as communities of faith to make a difference in the climate movement. I know that some of you have heard of Katherine Hayhoe as the climate scientist. She is an evangelical Christian and did not plan on becoming a climate scientist until when she was in college. She found out more about the climate crisis, and that is when she realized that because of her faith, she had to change and do something about it, and changed her major and became an atmospheric scientist. So this is kind of what I'd like to hear, us to have a little bit of a conversation and share what, maybe first, why are you called? What do you think makes faith a reason to get involved in the climate the climate movement. And then we can move on to what are you called to do about it, but, does anybody have John kind of shared yours at the end, the idea of stewardship.
Well, I've kind of left Christianity behind, but when I was being raised, I believed that Christianity in its true sense, the Christianity of Jesus, was an all-forgiving, all-supportive, all-inclusive pursuit. And that has been lost. But I think at its core, Christianity is this abortion. And, you know, much of my environmentalism comes from being Christian Science, but yeah, from that standpoint, that Christianity at its base is good. Whether you believe in God or whatever you want to believe in, but that's still good motivation to go out and preserve the world, people, families, you know, it's all encompassing.
It seems to me, I spent my career teaching biblical studies, so it's pretty appropriate. And it seems to me that one of the problems is that the ends of the Bible, the beginning and the end of our Christian canon, which with Genesis and Revelation, have been interpreted in such ways as to make it seem that the earth is suspended. People have cited the garden that we were in over,
Right.
As language, and others point to apocalyptic at the end of our canon that the world is not my home. I'm just passing through. I'm going to be in another world. So that those people who tend to have a certain hermeneutic and a certain approach to scripture are locked in a way to thinking dismissively about climate. And I think that there's a lot of ways of revising that, just like we do with other issues in the Bible that we think the Bible is against. We find resources in the Bible, in the Christian tradition. St. Francis is often invoked, and others who have found ways of reading texts and that encourage us to take another look. I mean, biblical generation had to live on the soil and have closer relationships than most of us have. I mean, they had waters, they lived in a semi-arid environment, had challenges with already pollution and so forth, and the decimation of trees throughout Palestine is very ancient. So they have all these problems, and there are resources there for looking at that. Now that we are pressed by our own situation, we take new looks.
When you're speaking would you make sure you speak loud enough for the people on Zoom? And if there's somebody on Zoom that wants to join in, just let us know. One of the things that I have heard in my conversation about climate with people of faith is the idea that God will save us. And I don't always know how to respond to that, but my idea is, even if that was something you held as a strong belief, wouldn't you still want to do all you could to do what you can, here on earth and humanly to make a difference?
There are, I'll characterize them as sometimes come off as jokes, but yes, but he uses us to, yes, he is going to save us through the ages, through our agency, in the matter like that. I'm going to send you other humans. I'm going to help you by a human. I'm not going to come down and do it. I'm going to inspire humans to do it. The other thing I was going to say is if we widen, if we a little wider scope on religion, certainly I think the Catholics, no other than the Pope, came out, I think, pretty forcefully. In fact, I think it's got to be one of his top 2 or 3 issues is climate change to the U.S., spoke to Congress, with Dago C, or however you pronounce it. I think he really came out forcefully. I think that St. Francis has, there are people who are resurrecting St. Francis patron saint of climate. And if you look at the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, they're, you know, really that nature is, completely central to, you know, it's not even that you're saving it, you're relying on nature to save you. You know, you're really all in it together. So I think there are, I think religions that are out of step with nature really are, it appears to be an error, certainly from certain viewpoints.
I grew up with the idea that faith without works is worthless. And, in my grounded Christianity as a child, growing up, the social gospel was everything. I mean, that was really, really important. I mentioned the other day to a couple people here that my mother's favorite Bible verse was from Micah, that do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. And so that's really impacted who I am. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I met Christians who were more of the Genesis, Revelation type. And it was so shocking that how can you be Christian and think that?
You know, I tend to view it through a lens of that we are all of God. And so there is something that is special and unique about the creation that is made holy or sacred. So we have to look at it through that lens. Yeah, and so I forgot where I was going with that, but I mean, the idea is creation as holy and sacred, that it is of God. So we have to treat it as such. So wanting to take steps to become more aware of it or figure out what's going on. I mean, there is this, we learned at an adult ed class maybe 6 months ago when somebody from the Botanic Gardens came out. Now I forget the term, but there is an actual term that describes the physiological or mental thing that happens when one steps out into nature. And being in nature actually produces endorphins that help you to feel better, literally, physiologically feel better. And so, you know, in my mind, the adverse is also correct, right? That if you walk out and nature is desolate and void, that there's a depression that is caused by it, that there is a lack, yeah.
There's a number of studies, I mean, a 5-minute walk in the park lowers blood pressure. You know, it's just, I mean, it's incontrovertible that if you spend time in a cubicle, it's not as, you know, beneficial as, you should get out.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I mean, here St. Francis and others, people like Hildegard began to be one of the 13th century. But they thought of nature as part of, they had kind of this idea of a ladder, you know, living being, all sort of part of this kind of same system that kind of comes from God. But then the idea was that everything in its own way is striving to return to its maker. And for us to return to our maker, that nature is part of that ladder. And Francis's most famous interpreter is Saint Bonaventure. He celebrated Saint Francis as because somebody who determined to make everything around him in creation a ladder, you know, to God. And so the idea is if something is a ladder, God, it's essential to you. So, you know, so, and also, the first poem, the first major piece of literature in the Italian vernacular was a poem that St. Francis wrote called Canticle of the Creatures. It's where you might have heard where he says, praise to you, brother sun, praise to you, brother moon, or sister moon. And he goes through all the 4 elements, you know, earth, air, fire, water, and offers them
praise, but it's not just praise to them, it's praise to God through these elements. You know, then he goes to the natural world, he goes even to death, that everything is a kind of ladder. It's kind of pushing you to that return to God, and everything around you wants to return to God through your appreciation of it, you know. And so I always have thought of Francis as being a tremendous resource for Christian thinking about the natural world. You know, and of course, there's stories about him that everywhere he went, you know, he's in a boat, all the fish follow the boat, you know, and then he preaches to birds. He can't find any humans, so he preaches to the birds. And he preaches to a wolf who's attacking people. There's sculptures of this stuff, but the point is that he thought of himself as a creature like everybody else, that we all share this creatureliness, and we're all that kind of same matter. So I've always thought and Hildegard of Bingen, similarly, she was kind of a little bit earlier, but likewise, the same kind of idea that everything needed for human well-being is provided to us through nature, and it's not by accident. And in her own, she used her own kind of folk medicine that she wrote books about, but about, you know, what to do when you have these ailments. And it's always like, to be related to God, you have to, is automatically to be related to nature in a way that enhances nature and allows nature to nourish you. And when you, and to fail to be rightly related to God means that you lose touch with the healing powers of nature. And to be in touch with it, she had a term viriditas, which means greenness. And so talk about the Christians are green. They have viriditas. They should be the greenest. But to be disconnected with nature and God led to ariditas, which means dried up, no creativity. So there are a lot of really resources in the medieval world, especially in the high Middle Ages of thinkers and mystics, really could be drawn upon. I'm sorry. But that's
what we want to do is hear people are thinking about.
That's fascinating point, but it sticks in my craw. Because, I mean, if Christians are green, it implies water and ferns and so that when you get to the desert, it's wasteland. And it's been judged though because it's not green. And thereby, the desert is not the earth. I mean, John Wesley Powell is a walking legend, and yet he wasn't able to preserve.
Well, you know, Hildegard lived in the Rhineland, so if you've ever been there, it's green. It's never into a desert.
Right.
I'm sure she would find life in the desert too.
Just need Christians that are multi-traffic.
So we don't have a lot of time, in fact, we're past time, but the next thing that maybe we could think about before we meet again is what are you called to do? Because next time, that's what we're going to talk about is, you know, what individuals can do, what action we can take individually, but also like policy action. Some of the things that, you know, we could think about is just what we're going to push for as far as policies that our governments to stop using fossil fuels, voting, boycotting industries that harm the planet, you know, educating both ourselves and others, and that's what we're doing here today, is learning from each other. So those are just some things that we could think about doing as far as towards climate justice, but you know, maybe in November, we can explore deeper how we can do things on a personal and community level.
So one quick question, technical questions. Cement and carbon emissions. I'm not aware of it, so tell me that is how cement.
It's very high in, you know, now that I found out he's a scientist, I really feel like he needs to step in here, but, yes, it's.
Production of it,
Yes,
and the production of it is very carbon intensive. I don't know.
I think cement is, I believe, at the time of the right, it's the number 2 manufactured product on the planet. Like, I think after water, cement is like the number one. And it's very carbon intensive, it's like 8 to 10%, I forget what it is, but, they have to heat it, a lot of energy heating it, and then they're driving carbon dioxide. One reason they're heating it is to drive the carbon dioxide out of the limestone. We can talk later, but it has a very high, greenhouse gas.
It'd be interesting to know if there are ways of making concrete that minimum is that.
There's a lot of work on that right now, because it is such a big deal. That project drawn down, book that you talked about last time, there's a whole section on cement. And so that's what's really kind of cool about the climate movement. You have so many different people with different areas of expertise that are zeroing in on, one is making, cattle feed out of a special kind of seaweed, and and that particular seaweed makes the cattle, have less gas, so less methane. So, and it's more nutritious. So you have all these things, it's just getting them all implemented and working, the solutions are there. But there is a lot of people working on the cement project.
Well, before we thank our presenters for this evening, I do want to let you know that some of you already got the flyer, but I do have more flyers that will let you know the date for the next the final part of this climate change series. It also has resources on it, so you can glean, where can you search for other resources. So you can take that, but I will just announce November 13th back in this room and on Zoom. Same Zoom link. We'll come back to conclude this series on October 22nd. So that's this coming Sunday at 8:45 in this room. We will also continue our conversation on artificial intelligence and chatbots and what that is looking like in our world, but also in our faith and that conversation. So come join us for that. It won't be on Zoom, but we will record that conversation as well. So you're welcome to come to all or any, but we do hope that you'll come back to help us conclude this conversation for this time. But thank you, John and Julie, for sharing again. And it was fascinating to learn about your work more, John. And Julie, you bring such interesting statistics and information and awareness. So let's give them. And we will hopefully see you on the 13th, if not sooner. Okay. All right, folks online, thanks for joining us.